Good evening, dear friends. Thank you for joining me on this Sunday evening when we want to look at chapter 11 of the book of Revelation. It's an exciting, mystifying chapter. Let's back up just a little bit. First of all, I said I would share from time to time some of the sources that I like to look into while I'm preparing these contemplations. One of them is Revelations, Visions, Prophesy, and Politics in the Book of Revelation by Elaine Pagels, a noted scholar, biblical scholar I believe in the United States. It's written from the Great Overview. It's not a specific commentary, chapter and verse and chapter and verse and chapter and verse, but it's written from the, you might say, the hot air balloon perspective, written from a great overview, combining themes and topics and people and places and times. Quite interesting. Then another one, a weighty tome, literally, called Revelation, Four Views, a Parallel Commentary. This is purely academic, you might say, in which, in four columns, literally, looking for a good example, you can see various interpretations of the book of Revelation. And it's sometimes helpful simply for the outward facts to consult such a commentary, to understand what did John mean when he talks about a temple or an altar or an angel or a lampstand, or where was Ephesus and where was Smyrna and Thyatira and so on. And then this evening you'll get another dose of Craig, what he finds interesting and important. Let's back up to chapter 10, just to remember. Another strong angel appears. And we see this angel in a particular constellation, an angel with legs. They don't really have legs, guys, but okay, for the picture, for the archetype, this angel stands with one leg on the sea, one leg on the land. These legs are described as pillars of fire. The angel is clothed in a cloud and bears a rainbow around its head. And we might easily see these two legs standing on these two contradictory elements, earth, water, the physical, the more fluid, the more etheric element, clothed in the cloud, another representative of that flowing, etheric, not quite earthly, not quite watery element. And the rainbow, the colors, the needs, the desires, the knowledge, the consciousness of this being, combined then in this upright I am. And this being hands the apocalyptist a book and tells him to consume it. It will be bitter in his stomach, but sweet in the mouth. And John takes the book out of the hand of the strong angel, consumes it, and it is indeed sweet in the mouth, bitter in the stomach. And then he is told to prophesy about many peoples and nations and tongues and kings. And we might say this prophecy is the content of the rest of the book of Revelation. Having taken this in, and we might recognize that when we run into something new and exciting, new insights, new knowledge, whether it be about the Bible or some other important aspect of our lives. At first it's sweet. Oh, it's exciting. Yes, I know something new, and I'm able to see things in a way I've never seen before, and it's sweet and exciting and bubbly. And then you begin to work with this knowledge. It begins to speak to your sense of responsibility, because what you know, you are responsible for. And that can put you through trials. That can become bitter or sour or difficult. And if the digestive juices are working well, you're able to take this in, you're able to integrate it into your life, and it becomes part of you. And maybe you pass the honey or the bitterness, or both, on to others. You become a prophet of those things that you've really worked through, that you have, as we say, digested. Then, chapter 11, I was given a measuring rod like a staff, and I was told, rise and measure the temple of God and the altar and those who worship there. But do not measure the court outside the temple. Leave that out, for it is given over to the nations, and they will trample over the holy city for 42 months. And I will grant my 2 witnesses power to prophesy for 1,260 days, clothed in sackcloth. Now, it's amazing that right after this moment where the book is handed to John, and he receives these very explicit instructions how to deal with the book, to take it in, to experience the sweetness and then the bitterness. The next picture that arises is he is given a measuring rod like a staff and told to measure the temple. Now, I learned something new researching these contemplations. There is a form of language called the divine passive. Now, if you went to school where I went to school in 5th grade English, we learned never use the passive voice unless it's completely impossible to avoid it. The divine passive has a slightly different function. That indicates that a person receives an object or an insight or a revelation or a picture. It is given, and we don't know who gives it, but this divine passive always indicates it's coming from a higher place. It's coming from a place of higher energy, and it is given, there is passive again, it is given for a very specific activity. The book was handed to John. The staff is given to John. And then he receives very specific instructions to measure the temple and those who worship therein. Fascinating, because in a way, I feel already in the course of this book of Revelation, we are not in the physical world anymore. We have been lifted up into a higher realm, a realm of higher consciousness, in which the pictures and the words and the images and the movements are nothing that are vaguely connected to anything earthly. And yet at the same time, we hear that John is told, measure. Now, measuring things is something very connected to the material world. When we go to the grocery store, we need a pound sack of flour, or we need so many ounces of a spice. We wouldn't want to just grab salt somewhere. We'd like to know how much salt is in there. Or you read a recipe to create a dish, and you need to know so many eggs, so many teaspoons of honey or salt or whatever it might be. This is very connected to this exact earthly material world. And yet, John is told, take the staff and measure the temple. Let us know how wide, how long, how high. And those who are in it, take measure of those people within the temple and leave out the outer court. That will be run over by the peoples of the world for 42 months. That's approximately 3.5 years, the time that Jesus of Nazareth bore the Christ within himself and walked the earth. It's a mysterious reference because the time of Jesus of Nazareth at the writing of the book of Revelation is past, but it seems to be a kind of an archetypical period of time for spiritual events, or as this might see, despiritualizing events. So we have now this tension between the book, chapter 10, and the altar, chapter 11. Religion, spirituality, will always consist of insight and worship. If it goes only toward insight, we would probably call it theology. If it goes only toward worship, it tends to kind of drift off into sort of nebulous worlds, not really grounded in facts, in real people, in real events. And so this productive tension between the two, you might say between science and religion. Theology is a science. Whether you like it or not, it's a scientific pursuit within the world of knowledge and investigation and research. And so the book that is digested becomes insight, becomes useful knowledge. And that is being applied now to the world of religion, to the temple. The sacred space is being measured by a divine rod, a staff, by the apocalyptist, by John, who is, of course, not a person of purely earthly consciousness. And then this, whoever this I is, I will grant my 2 witnesses power to prophesy for 1,260 days, clothed in sackcloth. Now, sackcloth in biblical times was perhaps the roughest of materials, cloth, that was not refined, not beaten, not bleached, not colored, just sewn together to make out of it a sack to transport potatoes or apples or grain or whatever it was that had to go from one place to the other, could be loaded into sackcloth, into sacks made of sackcloth. And to wear sackcloth would be something very uncomfortable. It would be a kind of penance. In the Middle Ages, they often spoke of a hair shirt, meaning that the inside of the cloth would be the itchy, uncomfortable, unpleasant part of the clothing, that one would live as a kind of penance. So these 2 prophets, these 2 witnesses, are going to be prophesying in sackcloth for 1,260 days. If anyone can figure out how many years that is, do that quickly. These are the 2 olive trees. These are the 2 lampstands which stand before the Lord of the earth. And if anyone would harm them, then comes a whole list of terrible things that will happen to the one who tries to harm these witnesses, who bring word from the spiritual world, who stand in the form of 2 olive trees or 2 lampstands. Now, olive trees haven't popped up in the book of Revelation yet. This would have been a very common sight in the Mediterranean world at the time, still is. We frequently get our olive oil from Israel, from Greece, from Italy, from Spain, from those areas where the sun is very intense for long periods of time. Olives need a long time to ripen. It's a long process to extract the oil from the seeds of the olive. And the trees do not grow they're not tall trees. So they're standing as 2 olive trees. We can imagine 2 beings who are completely infused with the powers of the sun. And then, in this instance, not only the physical outward sun, but that sun with which the Son of Man, S-O-N, is frequently compared or described. Remember chapter 1, a face shining like the sun in its full power. This is the sun that nourishes the olive trees. And the lampstands carry then the light of an oil lamp or of a candle. Again, a light that shows us the light from without can begin to engender the light from within. Many of us experience that in our meditative or our prayer practice by lighting a candle beforehand. If you attend the act of consecration of man in the Christian community, you experience at the beginning of the service that 7 candles are lit from left to right, and that these candles burn the entire time. They're not there so that the priest can see his book. Sometimes it helps, usually it doesn't. They are there to awaken the light within. I digress. I put on the announcement of this contemplation a reference to a little story that a Russian philosopher, Vladimir Soloviev, wrote toward the end of the 19th century, which you can imagine is inspired by this chapter 11 of the Apocalypse. And in this book, he conjures up a world of the 20th and then into the 21st century, a 20th century that consists of forces from the Far East overrunning Europe, conquering Europe, and then being driven out. This goes on for about 50 years. And toward the end of the 20th century, a man appears kind of out of nowhere, who is very beautiful to look at, very handsome, very well spoken, writes beautifully so that it inspires and excites people. And to make a long story short, this man is chosen to be the president of the United States of Europe. So the countries of Europe, after this attack from the Far East, unite, set aside their nationalistic differences, and create a united Europe. This is written, remember, at the end of the 19th century, when neither the League of Nations, nor the United Nations, nor the European Union had become anything close to even an idea in anyone's mind. Soloviev saw this happening already. Of course, it happened differently than he described, but it's imagination. Huh? So, this man becomes president of the United States of Europe. He makes many promises, many differences, many unevennesses between classes and races and niveaus of life are evened out so that there's not extreme wealth nor extreme poverty. One can say at a certain point the material well-being of the United States of Europe has become certain. Then the rest of the world engages in this uniting. And this particular man, who's 33 years old at the time, as I said, described as a very beautiful person, very much in love with himself, and considers himself a second incarnation of Christ. Christ is lower than he is superior to Christ. And finally he becomes, as it's called, the Emperor of the World. And the Emperor of the World takes a black magician, that is a practitioner of black magic, not a black magician, but a black magic practitioner next to himself. This being is called Apollonius. And together they rule the world. And once the material well-being of the world has been taken care of, he approaches religion. Now, by this time, 21st century, very accurate, thank you, Soloviev, very accurate, unfortunately. The practice of religion, especially the practice of Christianity, has been reduced to a very low minimum. There are very few practitioners of Christianity. Despite this fact, this Emperor of the World calls the representatives of the major branches of religion to a World Congress in Jerusalem. And at this World Congress, takes place in a very large, beautiful convention center, which bears Arabic names. There is a huge podium and then a large space where other people sit. And on this podium, of course, this Emperor of the World and his magical advisor Apollonius have a place with lots of empty seats. And at a certain point, he notes those who are present. There are representatives of the Roman Catholic world, of the Eastern Orthodox world, and of Protestantism. And the major representative of the Catholic world is then the newly chosen Pope Peter. The representative of the Orthodox world, with a great number of followers, is Elder John, who resides in Russia. And the representative of the Protestant world, since there is not such a great spiritual hierarchy, is a professor of theology called Ernest Pauli. Highly symbolic, there we have at this meeting of world religions, Peter, John, and Paul. Think of the three perhaps best known figures out of the New Testament next to Jesus himself: Peter, John, and Paul. And at this gathering, the emperor of the world stands up and makes a great proclamation that he is going to fulfill the deepest wishes of Christians. And he says the deepest wish of the Catholic Christians is spiritual authority. And all of those who are willing to pledge their spiritual authority to him as the protector of Catholic Christianity should join him on the stage. And many, many, many of the followers of Pope Peter rise and join the emperor of the world on the stage. Pope Peter and a few of his followers stay in their places. And then the emperor of the world calls out to the Orthodox and wishes them or agrees to assure them the purity of their worship. And again, he invites all of those who want to accept me as the protector of the purity of your worship. Join me on the great platform here. And many, 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 many followers of the Orthodox tradition arise and join the emperor of the world on his stage. Only Elder John and a few of those following the Orthodox tradition remain. And they move over and join the followers of Pope Peter. And then he calls out to those of the Protestant world. He says, I will allow you free authority over your thoughts and your feelings and the things you wish to proclaim. And this is exactly what Protestantism is all about. I will become the great protector of your tradition. So many, many, many of the followers of the Protestant tradition arise and join the emperor of the world on his stage. Only Professor Ernst Pauli and a few of the followers join together with the other followers of Elder John and of Pope Peter. And then successively, Pope Peter, Elder John, and Professor Pauli call out to the emperor of the world and call out that he is actually defiling religion. And suddenly Pope Peter is struck dead. Elder John calls out that he is, in fact, the Antichrist, that he is banned, and he is struck dead. Professor Pauli remains silent and bands together with the other followers. They want to carry the bodies of those who have been killed out of this meeting place to honor them, to bury them. They are held back at the door. Other guards of the emperor of the world take over the bodies and display them in the streets of Jerusalem, while Professor Pauli leads the followers of Elder John and Pope Peter out into the desert. And there they meet together. They have intense conversations, meditations, contemplations, and they realize that Christianity is really meant to be one body, to prepare for the coming of Christ again. Now, the emperor of the world has claimed that he is higher than the Christ. The two witnesses, we can call them that, Peter and John, have died because they claim and they call out this being as being the Antichrist. There are many more fascinating details to this story, but just to say that Soloviev, from his position at the end of the 19th century, inspired by this chapter of the book of Revelation, created a story that's only about 25 pages when you read it. In translation, my Russian isn't good enough. To show this ideal of the reunification of Christians, to welcome the coming of Christ, as we would say in our anthroposophical terminology, in the world of the etheric, or the realm of the clouds. And indeed, at the end of the story, the two witnesses are revived. That's also part of chapter 11. They come back to life. They join those who remain true to their tradition. And as they are worshiping in the desert, the heavens opened, and a woman, clothed in the sun, appears. The moon under her feet, 12 stars around her head. And this is the picture with which I hope to begin next time, chapter 12 of the book of Revelation. Thank you for listening, and have a wonderful Sunday evening and many blessings on the week to come. Thank you.